I created 3 ultra detailed biomes in Minecraft to push Mojang's wild update to the limits. The biomes I made have some of the most unique features you have ever seen. Imagine if you upgraded Minecraft's swamp biome even further by adding massive mangrove forests and spirits flying through the sky. Or what it would be like to create a mountainous rust-red desert with a huge temple and a monster of darkness within. How about a frostbitten wasteland in an ancient stronghold long overtaken by an order of dark sorcerers? But that's not all. There are so many other features in these biomes. If you haven't heard yet, the next big thing for Minecraft is the 1.19 Wild update. Mojang is planning to release major changes and additions for some of Minecraft's biomes, such as the swamp biome and the deep dark. And that's what this video is going to be about. How much more wild can Minecraft's biomes really get? Now, I wanted to push Mojang's concepts even further than what is being done in the Wild update by making the swamp full of supernatural effects. And I think that this is going to drastically change the idea of what a swamp biome could be in Minecraft. I began the terrain by developing a very flat set of ponds and lakes that would hold the wetlands. I then painted over all of it with a group of blocks that would hint at different depths of water. Afterward, I moved on to building some of the largest trees I have ever created on this channel, with the biggest ones being over 150 blocks tall. To make the biome as detailed as possible, I created 8 of these massive trees that I could paste around the build. But when it comes to detail, this is only the beginning, because I created an entire ecosystem full of life, which is great to mention right now because this is when the first spirit comes into play. He is a guardian of the swamp who looks over all other spirits and living things to ensure their protection. But more on the lore of this biome in the final cinematic. Now, this wouldn't be a worthy makeover of the swamp if I didn't include the mangrove trees that Mojang promised in their teaser of the Wild update. But the swamp couldn't just have these 2 varieties if I was going to make the biome insanely detailed. So I also added thinner trees that could create a second canopy for the swamp, as well as rotten mangrove trunks and tree stumps. Here's where things get interesting. To make the biome as realistic as possible, I made the trees have directional lighting by shading one side of their trunk lighter than the other. This means there would be contrast between the trees, giving them variety and creating a much more believable and immersive environment. But we've only just started because I still have all of the swamp's other spirits to build as well. After finishing the trees, I dove into an even smaller level of detail as I began to cover the banks of the swamp where the mangroves lie with drip leaves and lily pads. This would give the water a lush green color. But I didn't just use drip leaves. I also used spore blossoms on the mangrove trees to make it look like leaves and bugs were flying through the air. And with this final addition, we now have plant life at practically every scale possible in Minecraft. This is where the koi giants come into play. I built a variety of large bioluminescent koi fish gathering and swimming throughout the center of the swamp around the guardian spirit in a bunch of different positions. I tried to really make them look like they were frozen in time, and I think you will find that this is a consistent feature throughout all 3 of the biomes. To add a little more variation, I made these koi fish come in all different shapes and sizes. And what makes these koi fish special is that they are also spirits in the world. I built a ton of smaller koi fish heading in different directions so I could paste them anywhere and they would look completely natural. That means not only in the water, but flying through the sky in a spiral towards the beacon of light that the Guardian now holds. And the final feature of this biome is probably one that you weren't expecting at all. It's people. Now, whether these people are spirits or not is a complete mystery, so I'll let you decide for yourself. I built 4 boats with these people in them, releasing lanterns as they watch the spirits fly through the skies above them. And with that said, the entirety of the swamp biome is complete. Next up are the deserts. Deserts are one of the most boring biomes in Minecraft. They practically haven't been updated since 2012 when they added the original desert temples or when they updated the desert villages. To give deserts the love they deserve, I decided to start from the ground up and create something totally new. This was going to be a mountainous, dry desert that had practically no life whatsoever besides the nomadic tribes that wandered the dunes. But that's for later in this video. Now, I wanted this desert to have a huge valley carved out of it with a steep mountain range on either side to make the terrain appear as dramatic as possible. After I got a rough idea of what this valley and the wall of mountains behind it would look like, I moved into the next stage of detail, adding sand on the sides of the mountains and the bottom of the valley to smooth out any rough edges. To make this desert really stand out compared to anything that the original deserts have, I decided to go for a totally different scheme. Inspired by sci-fi landscapes like Star Wars and Dune, I painted the biome with a bunch of rusty colored blocks to give the barren landscape some vibrancy. quality. To break up the flat terrain that stood before the valley, I added a few different rock formations poking out of the sand. Like I said earlier, all of these builds feel like they are frozen in time. Little did I know these rocks would help make that happen. But before this biome could really come to life, I had to make some pretty big changes. After finishing the basic details of the terrain, I realized just how small this build was, and that if I left it like this, the illusion of an endless expanse of desert was going to be completely lost. So ultimately, I tripled the size of the terrain, making the mountains, the valleys, and the dunes expand to either side. Now, this was probably the most important decision I made in the entire build process, simply due to the huge change it made in quality. With the expansion of the terrain done, it's time for the most exciting part of this entire biome, the Red Temple, carved by the nomadic tribes themselves. But before I get ahead of myself, I had to build a way across the valley to make it to the steep mountains that lie on the other side where the temple would be held. When I started designing the temple, I definitely took a lot of inspiration from Petra in that classic desert temple style, while also trying to put my own twist on things. The build began with a large doorway and high arches on either side that were deeply sunken in the mountain. After establishing its base, I moved up as I began to form 3 sections of the temple that would support towers and triangular roofs. Once I finished building the structure, I then worked on making it flush with the terrain while also appearing as if it were truly carved out of the red sandstone. With the temple complete, we can finally move on to those nomadic tribes I was talking about. I figured you can't get real far in this scorched desert without some help. So I built camels alongside all of the nomads. And I have to say, camels are definitely not the easiest thing to build in Minecraft, especially at this scale. Many of the tribes members I ended up building were made to look like they were peering into the darkness of the temple. And that's because they are. Many of them knew when they arrived that they would be facing a monster of terrible darkness that has taken one of the last sanctuaries in the Rust Red Desert. Now in the final cinematic, I will reveal exactly what this creature is and why it seems some of the nomads have not come to this place by accident. With the final details wrapped up, we now have a completely upgraded desert with a crazy new take on the desert temple and what lives in the biome. Now the third biome is completely frostbitten and shrouded in fog and snow with seemingly no trace of life. But unlike the desert biome, this desolation is caused by the eternal cold of winter. However, there are still those that survive, but how they do it is entirely unnatural and it's only the beginning of this insane biome. The snowy plains in Minecraft haven't seen any major change since the 1.7 ice spikes that came out in 2013. And once again, I'm going to completely recreate this biome. I started the terrain by scattering jagged solitary mountains around the snow plains to make the biome have a little more contrast in height and give it a more menacing vibe. After smoothing everything out and connecting the peaks through the gradual slopes that would eventually form the new snow plains, I moved on to covering the tallest mountain peaks with thick layers of snow. To ensure that the biome wasn't just covered in a bright white layer of snow, I created a gradient that got thinner and thinner as you moved down the mountains. Next were the giant boulders I placed at the bottom of the mountain peaks, made to look like they had tumbled off from the top in huge landslides. With all of the terrain's major features completed, I moved on to the centerpiece of this entire build. But before I got to work, I actually had to elevate the largest mountain to make sure that it would be big enough for what is about to happen. Remember how I mentioned that there are those who can survive this place? Well, this is how. I designed a dark stronghold based on some digital art while trying to throw my own style in with it. A dark stronghold that was left behind by old tyrants after the endless winter swept over these lands. And I really tried to make the brutality of this winter as obvious as possible by burying the sides of the stronghold in snow that had built up from the howling winds. But who are these people I keep talking about? They are sorcerers of dark magic, a magic that has kept this stronghold from being destroyed by the bite of the eternal frost. And inside the stronghold, you can find where all of them are gathering. Now with the final pieces in place, the snow plains are complete. And before I dive into the lore behind each of these biomes, make sure you subscribe to the channel because every single one of my videos is going to be better than the last one, and I guarantee you, you're not going to want to miss it. The swamp is meant to be the last oasis that depicts the ceremonial gathering of all of the swamp's spirits. They have come to guide their children to the beacon of light that summons them. It is here where they will finally come of age and learn about the vast world they will soon have to watch over themselves. The nomads that wander the rust-red desert have come to their long-forsaken temple to tame a monster of darkness, a giant sandworm that took sanctuary in the temple. They travel to the beast out of desperation, seeking its strength to fight off warring tribes. They are outcasts, those who have taken over an abandoned fort after the fall of tyrants and the eternal frost. They gather to summon dark spirits from the ethereal flames and finally take revenge on those who did them wrong. I'll see you in the next video.